When you picture Robert Frost, what comes to mind? For most of us, it's that kindly, white-haired poet of New England, right? The gentle grandfather of American letters, writing about snowy woods and quiet country roads. But that image, well, it's only a tiny piece of a much darker, more complex, and honestly, a way more fascinating story.
I mean, come on. These are, without a doubt, some of the most famous lines in all of poetry. You hear them everywhere. Graduation speeches, self-help books, inspirational posters. They've become this powerful anthem for individualism, for forging your own unique path.
But what if I told you that our entire understanding of this poem is completely fundamentally wrong? What if it wasn't a celebration of rugged independence at all, but a cynical, private joke that spiraled into a devastating tragedy?
Yeah, to understand the real Robert Frost, the man of fire and ice, of grief and pure grit, we have to start right here, by unraveling the truth behind his most famous work, The Road Not Taken.
So there's this massive gap between what we think the poem means and what Frost was actually doing. We see it as this big call to action, be a trailblazer. But in reality, Frost wrote it as a gentle mockery of his friend, a guy who was so indecisive he couldn't even choose which path to take on a simple walk in the woods.
And here's the wild part. The secret has been hiding in plain sight this whole time, right there in the poem itself. Frost explicitly says that the two paths were basically identical, that the foot traffic had warned them really about the same. There was no road less traveled. The choice was completely meaningless. And that's where the poem's real genius is. It's not about making a bold choice. It's this incredibly cynical observation about human psychology. It's about our desperate need to look back at our random, insignificant decisions and invent some grand story about fate and purpose. You know, we tell ourselves a choice made all the difference, when in reality, it probably didn't matter at all. But this cynical little joke didn't just stay on the page. For the friend it was written about, a man named Edward Thomas, it had a terrible, unintended, and ultimately fatal consequence.
So here's how it went down. In 1914, the fiery Frost and the more timid Thomas get confronted by a gamekeeper. Frost stands his ground. Thomas, to his own deep shame, backs down. A year later, Frost sends him the poem, basically teasing him, saying, "See, no matter which path you choose, you'll always sigh and wish you'd taken the other one." But Thomas, who was still feeling guilty about his perceived cowardice, completely missed the joke. He read it as a challenge, a call to take the bolder path. So he enlisted in World War I to prove his courage, and was killed almost immediately. A private joke became a death sentence, a fact that would haunt Frost for the rest of his life.
This tragedy is really the key that unlocks the door to the real Robert Frost, a man whose life wasn't about peaceful walks in the woods, but about brutal hardship, intense relationships, and just unimaginable loss, starting with the most important person in his life. Meet Eleanor White, Frost's wife. They were total opposites, a dynamic that was perfectly captured at their high school graduation. As co-valedictorians, Eleanor delivered her speech with this perfect, calm composure. Robert's, he got so overwhelmed with anxiety that he had a full-blown panic attack and literally fled the stage. He was fire, she was ice. Frost himself called her the unspoken half of his work. He even wrote a poem where he compared his life to a tent getting battered by the wind, and the only thing holding it up, keeping it from collapsing, was the single central pole. That pole? That was Eleanor. She was the steady, rational force that allowed his volatile genius to even exist without completely self-destructing. And just like his love life was no simple romance, his view of nature was anything but gentle. There's this story from a 1952 interview. He was walking in the woods with a professor who was going on and on about the moonlit piece. "How beautiful nature is," the professor said, "only man is vile." At that exact moment, this terrifying shriek from a bird rips through the silence as it's being eaten alive. Frost's point was crystal clear. Nature isn't peaceful. It's a constant, brutal fight for survival.
And that brutal struggle, that was the story of his own life. Robert and Eleanor Frost had 6 children. They had to bury 4 of them. They lost children to illness, to an accident, and in one of the most devastating blows, to suicide.
So how does a person even endure that? A lifetime of poverty, of grief, of this crushing depression, without being completely destroyed by it?
Well, Frost's survival strategy wasn't in philosophy or faith. It was way more simple and practical than that. He relied on what we'd probably now call action-oriented thinking. When the terror and despair got to be too much, he refused to just sit there and brood. He would act.
He'd go outside and pull weeds or mend a broken stone wall or chop firewood. He'd focus his entire mind on one small, physical, controllable task. He even did this with his career. When publishers rejected his poems, he didn't see it as a personal failure, he reframed it. He was just collecting data on how to improve. He broke down these unbearable problems into manageable actions.
This lifetime of enduring hardship, of turning despair into action, it all led to one of the most public and triumphant moments of his life, a moment that was almost ruined by one last cruel twist of fate. So, at 86 years old, Frost is invited to be the first poet to ever read at a presidential inauguration. He writes a brand new poem just for JFK, but when he gets up on stage, the blinding glare of the sun off a field of fresh snow makes it impossible to read his paper. In front of the entire world, he's basically blind. But a guy who's survived what Frost survived doesn't panic. He just puts the unreadable paper aside and from pure memory starts reciting a different one of his poems.
And then he does something absolutely incredible. The original last line of that poem ends with the cautious, hopeful word would. But in that moment, in front of millions, Frost changes it. He declares the future will be ours. It's not a hope anymore. It's this powerful, defiant statement of belief and will forged in a lifetime of struggle.
And this brings us right back to where we started. The man who wrote a cynical poem about how meaningless our choices are spent his entire life making defiant ones, choosing to act, to build, to write, and to endure, right in the face of a brutal world. This was the epitaph he chose for his own gravestone, and it's just perfect. He didn't retreat from the world's cruelty or curse it, he engaged with it. He fought it, he argued with it. And, to quarrel with something, especially for your whole life, is a paradoxical but really profound act of love. Which leaves us with the poet's final paradox. In his most famous poem, Frost cheekily suggested that a choice is just a random act that we dress up with meaning later on. And yet, his own life proves the exact opposite. A single, seemingly small choice, the choice to mail that poem, became a blade that irrevocably altered the course of a life. So what is a choice? Is it a meaningless story we tell ourselves, or is it a powerful, dangerous force that can change everything? That's the question Robert Frost leaves us to answer.